ready for our finalist storyteller of the evening? Andy, are you ready? Guys, Andy!
It was 1999, and I was strolling through the streets of downtown Aberdeen in Scotland, and I saw a sign on the side of the road, and it said, "Live auditions for Blind Date TV show, now, inside." Now, I must admit, when I first left the house, I wasn't going out to try and find true love that day, but I really thought the idea of being on TV was friggin' awesome, so I went in. So as a little bit of background information, Blind Date is kind of like the dating game, except they have British accents, and they have a lot more risque humor. When I went in, all I had to do was fill out a form, and there was a whole bunch of stupid questions, and then they took a Polaroid picture of my ugly face. They stapled it to the form, and that was it. It took about 20 minutes. So I left, and honestly, a few hours later, I completely forgot I even had applied to be on the show. So about a week later, I was shocked to get an envelope with a really official invitation to the Scottish final auditions for Blind Date. It was very prestigious. Only 12 eligible bachelors had been invited to go along to that audition. I decided at that point to tell people I was going to be on TV, even though I hadn't got on TV. And I started getting, like, everybody I knew suddenly become a dating coach. They're all telling me, when you get on there, you got to be bold, you got to be loud, you got to be funny, and most of all, you have to use a lot of sexual innuendos. When eventually the day came, I took the whole day off work to go down there. I spent many hours on the train getting to Edinburgh, but unfortunately, because I was young and stupid, I spent zero time getting prepared for what I was going to do. When I got down there, it was really serious. We went into this fancy hotel. Everyone was dressed really fancy. The judges were actually all women. There was 5 TV producers. They all had business suits. They all had stern looks on their faces. And they took us into the room and sat us in a horseshoe-shaped seating arrangement. And they put lights on us, and they all looked really, really serious. And then the first judge leaned forward, and she said, "Each one of you has to get up now, and we want each one of you, one after the other, to do a 2-minute song and dance routine on why you want to be on Blind Date." I totally freaked out. That is not something I can do. But luckily, I realized that. But simultaneously, I realized that time would not help me at all. I decided to crash and burn, so I volunteered to go first. And I jumped up, and I said, "I want to be on Blind Date, Blind Date, Blind Date. I want to be on Blind Date. So all the girls I've loved before will be back knocking at my door. Because I'm so lonely, I could die. I'm so lonely, I touch myself. I want someone to hold me. I'm so lonely. That's why I want to be on Blind Date." Yes, it was that bad. The guy sitting immediately to my right, he jumped up, he looked around, and he said, "Screw this," and he ran out of the building. Everybody took their turn, and a lot of people were really, really good. One guy even had a guitar with him. He was prepared. Eventually, they started the interviews, and they went one by one from my left, and they put a spotlight on each person, and then they asked them a bunch of questions. Eventually, it got to the guy just beside me, and the first question they asked him is where he came from, and he started stuttering and stammering for about 2 minutes. And then finally, he jumped up out of his chair, and he said, "Screw this, too," and he walked out. So suddenly, we're down to 10, but then it was my turn. Now, before the Blind Date, the only thing I thought about was what I should wear, and I wore my father's kilt, and in the front I had a sporran, which was a sea otter, and I thought I looked really sharp, but I could tell by the judges' faces they didn't think so. The judge who was asking me questions said, "Why on earth did you choose to wear that outfit today?" So I said, "Well, the kilt is a nod to my parents' heritage. They're Scottish. And the sporran represents a beaver, which is a nod to my birthplace, which is Canada." And the judge said, "Well, you're going to have to learn to sit down more gracefully." When you sat down in that tall chair, we saw way more than we wanted to see. So that is when I decided to inject some humor and some innuendo. So I said, with all my energy, "Oh, you saw my beaver's tail?" The judges didn't even blink. They stared at me cold, not even a pity laugh. The next question I got was, have you ever met a celebrity as big as Cilla Black? So Cilla Black was a host of Blind Date. You may not have heard of her, but she was actually a famous singer in the 60s. She was managed by Brian Epstein. So that is the manager of the Beatles, not the Epstein who's in all the sex scandals, by the way. And I said, yeah, I've met someone as big as Cilla Black. I've met Lennox Lewis, the heavyweight boxer. And the judge said, he's not nearly as big as Cilla Black. So I said, yes, he's bigger. And again, no response. So basically, the last question I got is what I did for a living. And I said I worked offshore, and I enjoyed working offshore because I was single, and I got my food cooked for me, and I got my laundry done. So the woman said, oh my God, are you just here on Blind Date to find someone to cook and clean for you? So I said, no, I'm hoping to find a woman who's so rich that she can pay for someone to cook and clean for both of us. But again, no response. Spoiler alert, I didn't get picked to be on Blind Date. But I did realize for the very first time in my life that my jokes probably are not funny. And that was the start of a long journey where I started to realize that I had to pay attention to other people's body language and how they were responding to my message. And that got me ready for the time I met my wife around about 10 years later, and that helped me through that. So thank you very much.
Last storyteller. Keep it going for our last storyteller of the evening. Let it hear it. Let Andy hear it.